Our top story today, in a new report published today, the Public Accounts Committee has found the government is unable to provide any compelling examples of what levelling up funding has delivered thus far.
I mean, that's quite extraordinary. Just over 10% of the funds provided to reduce inequality under the levelling up agenda have actually even been spent. Well, in the studio with us, talkTV's political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald and also the former Labour official Richard Said. Thank you both for joining us. Alicia, it sounds ridiculous what they found, the Public Accounts Committee. No compelling examples of where levelling up's been achieved. In which case, what has this money been spent on?
Well, that's it. So let's just do a quick sum up of what levelling up actually means. So levelling up is things in a community that just makes it all a bit more livable. It's these things like street lighting, it's the repair of the roads, it's the public transport, it's all these things that just kind of make somewhere function in a way that residents would want to live there. So the government have this initiative. It's very much a Conservative initiative. It was announced during Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister to allocate funding to certain areas of the UK to kind of regenerate them, to kind of give them some extra cash to bolster their existing public services and just make some repairs and just make things a bit better. What the Public Accounts Committee found is that lots of these local authorities who'd been allocated the money in the first place either hadn't received it or they had the money and hadn't really spent it yet. And I think it's just a case of them not seeming to really know how best to spend that money. So nothing really tangible seems to have happened.
Richard, there is a discrepancy between the north and south. There is, unfortunately, a divide. Even things like life expectancy is worse in the north. Have the Tories failed the north of our country?
I don't think... Well, yes. Yes is the short answer to that. All over. You can go back to the next segment. Look, Boris Johnson didn't intend to level up this country. The Conservatives didn't intend to level up this country because what that always had to mean was money being taken from the wealthier Tory voters in the south of the country being redistributed to the less wealthy Red Wall constituencies. That was never going to happen. That's not an electoral strategy that can ever win the Conservatives an election. But
well, it could if those people who lived there saw, actually, I've got better transport infrastructure and I've got better public services, and that's what I was promised.
Wait, say again. You think that has happened?
No, I think you said it was never going to be a successful electoral strategy. If they had delivered on levelling up, people could say, right, things have improved here.
But the point is that that would have involved taxing the core vote of the Conservative Party, those wealthier individuals in the south more. And I just don't believe that, Labour...
But what we're actually hearing from this report, Richard, is they haven't spent the money yet. So before they've even thought about who they're taxing, there's a whole significant sum of money that hasn't been chipped away at. Let's go...
£7 billion quid.
What would be interesting, let's go live to Morley, because our reporter Nick Ellaby is there. It's in West Yorkshire, speaking to residents who were made exactly those promises, Richard, that they were going to have their area levelled up. Nick, a very good morning. The residents you've been speaking to, do they feel hard done by lack of what they were promised? Their area is going to be levelled up.
Yeah, good morning, Rosie. Morning, JJ. People we're speaking to here in Morley, just south of Leeds, do seem to be quite hacked off about, what they've been promised and what's actually been delivered. So in 2019, it was one of Boris's key manifesto pledges to level up towns like this in the north of England. And we can actually show you a project that, has been a recipient of that Towns Fund and that levelling up money. Here at the bottom of Morley High Street, it's called Morley Bottoms. The original plan was to pedestrianise this whole area and have it a kind of European-style bar culture where people can sit outside on the pavement. Well, as you can see, the Yorkshire weather not really helping that. And if you have a look at this part of the street here, so this was intended to be just for pedestrianised. Well, that man's just driven past and says it's a disgrace. And that's very illustrative, to be honest, of what people are telling us here. So those bollards, just at the front of the entrance to the pedestrianised bit here, people say have never actually been up. Difficult to drive over. We're hearing cars clunking over that the whole time. And then the rest of the street, these flagstones, it was supposed to be just for people to walk on, but because of pressure from local people to open this back up, which had caused congestion in other parts of Morley, now you've got cars and vans driving over it and caving the whole thing in. And then all this standing water as well, you can see, and sand, that's from in between the flagstones. The drainage is poor as well. Just have a look at this drain here. That's full of sand. That sand is what the flagstones were set in. So this whole thing, people around here that work here and live here are telling me it's just been an absolute mess. Good for these businesses, these bars here that have opened up at the bottom of town. This is an example of those businesses that this levelling up money is trying to attract into towns like Morley. But everyone very unhappy about the state of the situation here at the bottom of the high street. I did ask Leeds City Council how much of the 24 million that Morley was given in August 2022, that's 18 months ago, had been spent. They couldn't tell me how much, but they did point to a few projects that have been finished and planned. First of all, the council have bought an old church, but for an undisclosed sum. That's being turned into a learning and skills centre. A new children's play area has been built at Hembrig Park round the corner, and others are planned for later in the year. And then they're also having meetings about protecting local heritage buildings. But, you know, on that heritage, a lot of people here in Morley are unhappy about those Victorian lampposts that have been ripped out. And one woman here who works just up the road told me have been replaced with something that looks like out of Disney. You can just have a look at the lamppost here. So they're unhappy about losing that small part of heritage, but certainly Leeds City Council trying to protect a lot of the buildings in town and keep that heritage of Morley. This is a very proud town, which was huge in the textiles industry as well. So they're trying to hold on to some of that whilst developing and attracting new businesses into the town as well. Guys.
Nick Ellaby investigating Morley's bottom there. Richard, should we be surprised at this? Because when Sunak was going for the leadership of the Tory party, he went on record and was recorded saying, "I'm going to take the money from the poor areas, from the urban areas, and bring it back to the wealthy areas." He said that. He wanted to reverse everything that Labour had done. And essentially, he's a man of his word, isn't he?
Well, that's a very fair-minded way of describing him. Yes, I think, you know what, I think that's true. The Conservative Party is currently being ripped apart by this exact political, ideological division, right? It's between the people who say, in order to build a broad electoral coalition, you've got to be taking some money from the super rich and putting it into places like Morley Bottom. Wonderful place name, but one which I think we can all agree is perhaps a little bit strange on a family show like this. You know, and then the other half of the Tory party, which says no, focus on our core vote, the people who we'd be taking the money away from if we were going to do levelling up. The fundamental issue, I think, is that what does levelling up mean? It means evenly distributing the billionaire class a little bit more around the different counties of the country. But actually what people want is for the gap between the super rich and everyone else to be a little bit less huge, right? Because they know that it's not just that that's unfair in itself, it's that that makes your society less happy. It means that you've got a particular group of people who've got much more power in that society, which is just frankly wrong. We can see that with Paul Hester right now, you know, this nasty racist donor to the Tories. And most fundamentally, you know, why is capitalism a justifiable political system, right? It's because it's supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be meritocratic. If you work hard, then you'll succeed. We know that unequal societies where the gap between rich and poor is bigger, like Britain, are societies where it is much harder to succeed
well,
if you're working
Richard,
class
I mean,
and middle class.
If you're unhappy with the status of play that you've just laid out, Alicia, your chance to be able to say to the Conservatives, no, you do not have my support, has just got a little bit later. We heard yesterday from the Prime Minister, general election isn't going to happen when local elections are in May.
Yes, we have. And this has just been this rumour that has been growing and growing and growing about when the election will be called. And lots of people suddenly saying that there was a chance it could be in May. So obviously very, very soon. I think the final date that Rishi Sunak would have to announce it is in the next couple of weeks. So, I mean, if he does suddenly change his mind, we will know about it very, very soon. But the assumption was that it would be in the second half of the year. There's several reasons for that, mainly because I think the Conservative government at the moment are just holding out hope that things could get better. They're like, why would we go to the polls now when things are, you know, that there's no debate about the fact that things are quite bad for them at the moment? Why would they do that now when even if there's this much chance that it could improve, they may as well take that chance and try and push it a bit later. So Rishi Sunak very much dampened everyone in Westminster's hopes of a May election. But that's not to say that's totally out of the question. He could still do it.
Yeah, Alicia, just going back to the levelling up, who is to blame? With Nick Ellaby in Morley saying the locals are complaining about the lampposts, that's not central government who decide what lampposts get replaced. So who is to blame in this situation then?
Well, it's local authorities and councils, but at the end of the day, they get their funding allocated by government. And the Levelling Up Fund, this is an extra bit of money. This isn't just a normal allocation of funds that councils get anyway, and the councils have to generate themselves. This is an extra bit of funding that the government give to councils. And so this specifically is just the fact that that money isn't being used properly, it's not being allocated properly, it's not being spent in the right way.
Richard, you think if Labour get into power, you think things are going to be different? Are they going to start distributing the wealth across the country?
I think Labour's always been very clear that there needs to be a much fairer allocation of where tax money comes from, and also councils need to have the right to make a little bit more money through their own taxation as well. I do think that the emphasis that we're putting on local authorities here, the blame that maybe is being discussed about councils here, is a little bit unfair. Even the government themselves, who've got a really strong interest in blaming councils for what we're talking about here, the failure of levelling up, even they have said, no, it's not the council's fault, it's about project-specific issues, it's about the impact of the pandemic and inflation. If the government's not blaming councils, we shouldn't be.
What about city mayors? We have city mayors, they have more power than they've ever had. Surely they should be taking some responsibility for this. If locals are complaining about where the money is being spent, then surely that's down to the local councillors and city mayors rather than the centralised government.
Well, well, firstly, I think most of the levelling money has probably gone to places that don't have city mayors, would be my guess. But also, I just bring you back to the previous point, like, again, the central government would love to blame city mayors for this mess if they could. But what they know perfectly well is that over the last 12 years, they have ripped away enormous amounts of funding, which goes to our libraries where our kids can read. It goes to our toilets where disabled people and vulnerable people, depend on public toilets. They've taken away funding from all the things, mending potholes, things that really impact our daily lives. They've taken away huge amounts of funding, and then they've just given back crumbs. And they've done it in this incredibly ineffective way. I mean, sure. Are we surprised that's not worked out?
We're not. Well, then the viewers think the same. Mark has messaged in saying, we levelled up, oh yes, by levelling down. The country is an equal mess all over. Facts.
There you go.
Well, sorry, Richard. That's all we have time for with you for now. Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Richard, former Labour Party official.